All right, we are live on YouTube.
Nice. Badaboom. Which is crazy
Bada
because
boom.
this is kind of more of like a test, but let me just go on YouTube and check.
Yeah, I just got a notification saying that we're live.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. Look at that. Yep. We're live.
Welcome to the live with Bada Boom.
Yeah. Let's see if I'm gonna invite some people, see if they could come in.
Are you on YouTube under the Bada Boom account right now?
That what?
Are you on like youtube.com under the Bada Boom
Yeah.
account? Okay, because I just sent some text. I just dropped some stuff in the live chat to see if anything popped up. Hey, there we go.
There.
I know I just moved, but every time we do a Zoom, I get very jealous of your background. Because all my comic books are in boxes still because I don't have any place really to put them, so they're just kind of staying there.
All right. Let me see if anyone's in the chat.
Yeah, we got Legion of Comics saying, "What's up, fools?"
Yo, what's up? So yeah, you have the docket. What are we gonna talk about tonight, Troy?
Yeah, so something that is in the news recently is let me pull this back up real quick. We have Rick Rimdeer. He's rejected Batman and X-Men and has signed an exclusive deal to Image Comics. It's a 3-year deal, and he's pretty happy with the deal. It sounds like because he gets to keep his own. All the content remains his as he's as he works with Image over the next 3 years. So he said he's betting on himself. It's one of those things he gets to leave to his kids in the future. And it's not like you write a Batman or an Avengers comic and like, okay, it stays with one of the big two, wherever it is. It's like whatever you make in this, it'll get put out for the next 3 years for him, and then he owns it still. So it's an interesting decision. I don't know if everyone would want to. I think everyone would want to, of course, leave something to their kids, but who wants to turn down a chance to like write for Batman or a chance to write for like the X-Men? So I think where Rick is in this time in his life, it makes a lot of sense for him to do it. But if I was in his shoes, I don't know if I would make the same choice because those are two of some of the most well-known comic book franchises from the big two that might be kind of hard to turn down if I could write my own Batman comic or write my own X-Men comic. But It sounds like he's got a lot of great ideas, and he's ready to bet on himself, and he's going to be proven over the next couple of years at Image.
Yeah, well, Remender is in a position to do that because for years he's been doing creator-owned stuff that's been highly successful. So, it's a pretty safe bet when he bets on himself. And he's already done the X-Men thing. I mean, he hasn't really done much from DC that I know of or that he's actually done, but he's written Captain America, he's written the Uncanny X-Force. So he's been around a bit, and his name carries a lot of weight. So I think it's something where it's not really a bet on himself. It is pretty jarring when you see someone say that they've turned down those things, but when you look at the name, you're like, well, yeah, he could turn that down.
Yeah, I mean, he said that he's betting on himself. So I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, like, you've done a lot of stuff. I don't think that bet's like that hard of a bet
Yeah.
to make. Um, but it's interesting. I was curious what you would think of. Do you think more comic book writers, comic book artists are maybe trying to lean more towards uh, things like this deal to where they can retain more of their content they've created? I guess it kind of just depends on where people are in their career, but uh, someone that's starting out probably wants to work for the big two, but at the same time, if someone's got really good ideas, maybe they don't want to lose those down the line if they're going to share those stories through characters that are going to stay in the big two.
No, I mean he's fine.
I mean,
And
yeah, for him,
Mark
he's fine.
as Mark was saying in the chat, a lot of creators are kind of taking that chance because you see more and more that really even though you're writing Batman, it doesn't feel like you're writing Batman because it's not like you're getting paid to write Batman. You know what I mean? It's more of like one of those things where you're doing it for exposure. So you see more creators take that chance of going the creator own route because the reality is like, hey, yes, I'm taking a bit of a chance, but the reality is I'm not actually getting paid much less than I would if I was taking on some work at the big two. So the calculus, whereas before it used to be a huge bet on yourself when you were saying no to Marvel and DC. Now it's like, well, I guess if I want to check that off my bucket list that I wrote Batman or whatever. But if you built a name for yourself, it really makes no sense to kind of go back unless you had some type of like real story you wanted to tell. Because the reality is the upside as creator own work is there in terms of the licensing. If something you create at the big two is really good, the best you can hope for is a credit in the eventual movie and maybe an invite to the red carpet, but that's about it.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested to see what he comes out with during his time in Image, and I feel like there's always going to be stories from the big two, and I know we've had a recent interview where we talked about like, oh hey, sometimes this story that someone makes is like, oh we love it, and then there's some times where it's like, oh but that's not my version of the character. I don't like what you did with whatever. So those stories are always going to be around, but those unique ones that come out of uh, those stories that individuals have, that it sounds like those are the ones that are going to be coming out of Image over the next 3 years with Rick. Those are the ones that are like, no one can, like you said, no one's going to take those away. They're going to have like a lot of their own value to them because they're going to be characters that are like just for him and just under that Image title that no one else is going to be coming along and trying to change. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he comes out with in the next couple of years because it's going to be uh, that content that's, dare I say, you can't change it. It's so pure, you won't be able to change it, and no one's going to come back and try to rewrite it like they can with some of the stories we've seen in the big two.
No, and you have some really great creators that have taken that route. Mark, once again, 100% in the chat. You have Tynan, Snyder, a couple others, Jeff Johns. Some of Jeff Johns' best books in the last like 5 years have all been, his creator own work because he can't seem to get a DC title out in time. So even if you like those books, you're like, well, it took him 3 years to release 5 issues of this. But yeah, it's a really good route. I really love what Scott Snyder has done at Comixology. there's a few titles that he's done there that are really good. You have Tynan, who's done some really good work, like Something Is Killing the Children. What ties those people together? They all worked at the big two. Tynan Snyder worked on Batman. Jeff Johns worked on everything at DC. And in Remender's case, he was big at Marvel. He even wrote Avengers books. So, I think these creators have the cachet to kind of go that route. And, like I said, even though it seems like a pretty big headline, like, hey, comic writer rejects X-Men and the Batman, but the reality is it's like, well, he did write those characters, like those level of characters before, and now he's established to the point where it's not really a bet on himself, but more like, hey, like, why would I do that when I could create something of my own? And it always takes me back to a interview with Robert Kirkman years ago. He says, like, you don't grow up wanting to write the sequel to something.
Yeah.
You grow up like you want to kind of make your own thing. So, I think this is it's very true. And that's a very practical thing he says in a statement where it's like, hey, I would like something to leave my kids. You don't want your kids to be like, hey, my dad was one of the 200 people that wrote Captain America. As cool as that is, it's, if you're not, one of the best, which I think Remender is one of the best, because I really loved his him and John Romita Jr.'s take on that, and obviously he introduced Falcon as Captain America, so he had a huge impact. But I don't really think it's a huge bet, considering all he's been doing the past couple of years is this creator own stuff.
Yeah. So, guys' own stuff coming out for the next 3 years in your image. Keep an eye out for it. There's been a variant cover for Moon Knight that's been coming along out the last couple days. New suit for Moon Knight that's going to be coming out in Vengeance of the Moon Knight, and it's got a really cool look. It's a lot darker. I feel like most of the time, every time I see Moon Knight, his entire costume is white, but there's a really cool combo of black and white in this costume. And I haven't got to read any of the recent issues of Moon Knight that have been coming out. I was curious to know. It's been like a year and a half since the Moon Knight series has come out on Disney Plus. How do you feel like that series has held up? And do you think now is the best time for fans to dive back into the comics with Moon Knight to get a better perspective of that character, or a new one?
Well, Jed McKay's been doing a great job with that Moon Knight run, but when something has gotten stale and they're like, all right, we got to kill this character. And Jed McKay has written two characters at this point. I think he's killed. Last year was Doctor Strange, and then this year was Moon Knight. So, it goes to show you that I love those books. I think it's one of the stronger titles at Marvel, but anytime I see like a death being set up at Marvel, I'm like, oh my god, like, you're gonna bring them back in a month. They don't even wait very long, so it's like, can you really call it a death? It's like some of those more recent Disney movies where someone dies, and then 2 seconds later, through the power of love, they come back. And that's where that is, and I don't think the series has held up. It is one of those things where you felt that it was undercooked, and sort of highlighted why Disney as a company is in the position it's in, because it spent so much money on these shows that really had no one, didn't justify the price tag in a lot of ways. I don't know if you saw, but they released a budget for the Marvels and it's 130 million, which is super modest for a Marvel movie. But
Dang, that is pretty good.
somehow Secret Invasion costs 220 million. So you're like, wait, like, how where do these numbers come from? Who's skimming off the top at these companies? Because it does seem like there's a large money laundering scheme going on somewhere. But I don't think
Yeah,
it's
and
held up much. I do like some of the moments in it. I thought the reinvention of the costume was really cool. It's one of the few times where you see something where it was like it was made for a movie, and obviously given some, a different design you've never seen in the comics. And I was like, this is pretty cool. But it was not great. That show was not great.
Yeah, I've been watching a couple of Ethan Hawke interviews today, like of the last week or so, and I'm like, wait, this is the same guy that was like that villain in Moon Knight? Because like, I just can't connect the two because he's so good in interviews, but he's so bad in Moon Knight. And like you said, like we've said this in passing that I think it's like 6 or 7 episodes long, and it's really there only really needs to be like 3 episodes, but they're just trying to introduce way too many characters and build on different things. And if it was supposed to be a movie, it probably would have been great, but they just were like, hey, make it 6 episodes and stretch stuff out. And I feel like Moon Knight was like the start of the fall of like the Disney Plus series because the other 3 or 4 were so good, but they already had planned those well in advance before they announced the streaming service. And Moon Knight and She Hulk were like the two that were the afterthought, and they just and Secret Invasion. Like the Marvels, 130 million top actors. Like these actors are definitely getting paid a ton, and 130 million versus 200 million for 6 episodes, and 130 million for what? It's like got a pretty short runtime from what I remember seeing. I think it's only going to be like a little less than 2 hours, and I feel like it's going to be a great movie. It gives some Guardians of the Galaxy vibes, but we'll just have to wait and see. But I still think it's going to be better than some of the stuff we've seen on Disney Plus.
It'll for sure be better than Secret Invasion. That's a low bar, but I think,
Very low bar.
I think it could clear that, and it's one of the few solo movies that was able to cross $1 billion. So, despite, the first one not being great, it is one of those movies like Aquaman where you're like, I think it somehow, some way will surprise people, because I think most people have pegged it to kind of be like, hey, like the MCU's kind of falling off and stuff like that. But there was something about that first Captain Marvel movie. Obviously, there's like a lot of factors that went into that, and we've talked about it, but it the first one made $1 billion, which is insane. So it would be hard to kind of like top that, but I think it could beat the more recent Marvel movies. Even though it's not
Yeah.
that hard considering, Ant-Man was not great and
Yeah.
Secret Invasion was downright terrible.
Yeah. And I think that there will also be a little bit more pull for this movie because not only are we going to have Captain Marvel, but we're also going to have 2 characters that were in Disney Plus series. We're going to have Spectrum, and we're also going to have Miss. Gosh, why am I blanking on
Miss
this person?
Marvel.
Probably Miss Marvel. I'm
It's
like
called the
probably because I
Marvels.
haven't probably because I haven't even finished watching that Disney Plus series. I'm blanking on the name. But we're having 2 additional characters in this movie from Disney Plus series, Spectrum and Miss Marvel. So I think that it's going to generate quite a bit of excitement from different audiences that were fans of those Disney Plus series. And if there's a ton of people that are fans of hopefully of Captain Marvel that like everything before Endgame has a decent following and we'll hopefully have a decent turnout. So whether or not the scores on Rotten Tomatoes are great or even accurate, I feel like it's still going to make a decent amount of money, and there'll be a newer audience that got into it from the Disney Plus series that'll also attend. So yeah, I bet it'll clear Ant-Man. Not $1 billion. I'm going to say maybe close to 650 million. I feel like that's still a little generous, but I think it'll do that.
Yeah, it's going to be better than some of the stuff that's come out. That's for sure. But again, the bar is pretty low. But talking about Moon Knight and sort of like where the comics are going, it does seem like Marvel has kind of separated a little bit from the movies and the comics for the better. We've had some like really good titles, like Moon Knight being one of them, Ghost Rider. You know, you got the Incredible Hulk, which is really great right now. And I think a lot of those things is because they've kind of separated themselves a little bit. I think they were trying to fit themselves into the movies and it wasn't working because the reality is no one's really leaving those movies and coming to get the comic books and it reflects in the sales. So it's really good to see, them invest in that. I still hate the fact that every time they feel like, hey, we need to boost sales in the comics, they're like, let's kill this character. Because it's
Yeah.
getting so diminished. The same thing with the 30,000 variant covers. Uh, but I do like the effort that they're putting in. Jed McKay is a really great writer. On Moon Knight, you have Philip Kennedy Johnson on the Hulk. You have Benjamin Percy on Ghost Rider. And some other titles that which were really strong. For like a good year, I was maybe reading one one title, which was like Daredevil, and now it's kind of gotten spread to 3 or 4. Which for in my if you've ever listened to the podcast, this is a DC podcast.
High praise already.
So if I have 5 books from Marvel that I'm reading on a monthly basis, shows that they've really righted the ship in some ways.
Yeah, for sure. And it'll be interesting to like see, I guess, how they're just gonna reshape things because I mean, I'm not a fan of people just dying in comics to fix stuff. I think it's like a fun little it can be a fun one-off, like if the character's like rebooted or reincarnated, but like when we shift the main character that's going to be like the spirit of Moon Knight, or you just introduce so many new characters that the mantle gets passed over while you're also killing a character off. It just feels like, huh, why I would have already invested and now I just lost that investment by having to give it to someone else. And it feels like you're just having to start the whole series all over again. Especially if you're not really doing it from a point that's like, oh, this makes 100% sense. If it's not something that's like really tied into the story, but just like, hey, we kind of didn't do the best with them. Let's kill them and do something else. It's like, okay, that's just an easy excuse because it's a comic book.
No, you're completely right, and they need to come up with better ideas. But if there's a writer that I think could pull it off, is Jed McKay. I knew you'd agree with that, Mark. Yeah, those are all great titles right now. Especially considering the fact they're going back into their bag. They're like, all right, like what worked about these titles and how can we capture the essence of them so that we can, let them reflect in the comics and fans could come back because for so long they were ignoring the audience when it came to a lot of those books. All right. Well, it looks like we've kind of gone through the end of our rundown. This is a really great test live stream. Thank you, Mark, for appearing. We're really working on these. We're hopefully going to get on a regular schedule, use StreamYard so that we don't make our lives hell, have a better breakdown, hopefully a layout, all these things. So thank you. And with that, bada boom.